It's a scene that's being repeated all over the Middle East. First, an authoritarian leader is thrown out, only to be replaced by unrest. In Libya, the overthrow of authoritarian dictator Muammar Gaddafi left a vacuum and a transitional government struggling to maintain security and order. Now, foreign residents of the once wealthy country are being told to evacuate for their own safety. During NATO's intervention in Libya's 2011 civil war, large numbers of weapons were brought into the country to support rebels fighting Gaddafi, and even more arms and ammunition passed into the hands of tribesmen once his regime fell. Libya's weak government has left Sahara tribesmen and local militia bosses in control of arms, trafficking in and out of the region, and in position to help Muslim militants traveling to fight in Syria, Egypt, and the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip. One such militia, al-Sharia, is believed to have been behind the September 11 attack in Libya on a U.S. consulate that killed 4 Americans, including the ambassador. Since then, militants have been blamed for a wave of assassinations of security officers and government officials. And across the border in Mali, French and Mali army forces fighting Islamic militants are finding weapons cache after weapons cache, with direct links to the collapse of Gaddafi's regime. This month, as the Islamist militants moved south, France launched its military intervention to rescue the Mali government, conducting airstrikes against militants. In retaliation, Islamic militants seized an oil complex in eastern Algeria, prompting a siege by Algerian forces that killed dozens of Western hostages and militants. One hostage managed to record images of the militants secretly. The group's leader, Mokhtar Belmokhtar, told a regional newspaper his men received weapons from Libyan extremists who were shipping arms to Algeria across the desert with the help of nomad tribesmen. Jihadists throughout the region, both with al-Qaeda and their allies, have been the biggest beneficiaries of the Arab uprisings, he said, because the uprisings broke the fear people had before authoritarian governments and gave them access to arms, allowing them to fight a holy war against developed nations seeking to control the Sahara. U.S. President Barack Obama, in early January, said 2 wars and a massive anti-terrorist effort by his country was paying dividends, and said America was very close to its goal of decapitating al-Qaeda. But in late January testimony to the U.S. Congress, his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, conceded that, even if the al-Qaeda group has been dramatically weakened, Islamic militants have moved in to fill power vacuums and to take advantage of chaos in countries like Libya.
Benghazi did not happen in a vacuum. The Arab revolutions have scrambled power dynamics and shattered security forces across the region. Instability in Mali has created an expanding safe haven for terrorists who look to extend their influence and plot further attacks of the kind we saw just last week in Algeria.
Some of America's closest allies are cautioning that while it will be easy enough to defeat Saharan militants armed by weapons flooding out of Libya, it will be almost impossible to impose stability on the region.
Obviously, the Mali operation, I think, caught a lot of us by surprise. We knew there was a big problem there. We thought that the African ECOWAS, the Economic Community of Western African States, we thought they were getting their act together fast enough, but clearly they weren't. The French knew that this would be an absolute disaster to allow another Somalia to be created there, failed state. You know, the French have their own strategic interests. They have large numbers of French citizens working in that part of the world because they've always kept very good links with their former colonies. They have uranium mines in neighboring Niger, which is an area of high Tuareg density. Can you imagine if an Islamist terrorist group took control of a uranium mine, the potential to make a dirty bomb and take uranium and launch an attack in our cities in the West would be absolutely horrendous. But, you know, to be frank, neither the Americans nor the Europeans nor anybody, we're not good at nation building. I mean, it's one thing going in militarily, nipping it in the bud, preventing the collapse of a state, but it's quite another thing trying to reconstruct, you know, a modern, you know, progressive economy in these countries. It's, you know, very, very poor. Not much in the way of resources, you know, internal divisions, ethnic divisions between Tuaregs and Malians and what have you within, and the Tuareg diaspora crosses into Niger, crosses into Mauritania, complex countries. But, you know, from the security point of view, I think this can be sorted out fairly quickly because there's only a few hundred fighters. I don't think they can take on a modern army. But then, of course, you will have a kind of asymmetric insurgency type situation like we've seen in Iraq, like we've seen in Afghanistan, and that's a much more difficult long-term problem where obviously hearts and minds, developing the economy, creating jobs, which the same rules apply in Somalia, would apply in the Sahel region.
The international community has slowly recognized that the arms flooding the Sahara region from Libya and the instability in the region must somehow be dealt with. The League of African Nations is taking a leading role, with some 1,000 troops from West Africa and Chad having already arrived in Mali, and the number is expected to rise to 5,000 in coming weeks. But people on the ground in the Deep Sahara are saying security hasn't come to their lives yet.
The market is not as busy as before. People are afraid. That's why you don't have that many people today. But there is some activity. Usually people from neighboring villages come here, but today they were afraid and didn't come.
For people like Tumkara to live lives free of danger, the international community must do something that has never been done before: enforce peace and law and order across the most remote districts of the Sahara Desert.